Mustafa. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for having me here today. And also, I should like to start by echoing what Mr. Sabir said earlier, and would like to extend my gratitude to the Islamic Christian Studies Center and the Center for the European Islamic Thought for the great efforts for making this happen today, this exciting and interesting event. And a very special thanks to Alicia Asmussen for her great contributions in this regard. So, I'm not by profession a political philosopher, as I introduced, or a social scientist. And while I normally love to engage in the more abstract discussions on the general topics of philosophy and theology, I have very little patience for the abstract philosophical gloss on the kind of political issues, the popular immediate political issues we have direct material impact on the general public and masses. And besides that, I should also like to, common person, I should like to bring in the view from a common person's point of view, who is concerned about the things which are happening around him and across the world. So I will therefore try to engage through a more accessible discourse and only share my very immediate thoughts on the just couple of issues that I deem to be of the greatest import at this point, and to elaborate the rest of the things if need be in the QA session. So, ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to come here and talk about the Arab Spring's consequences on the global coexistence as perceived in East and the West. And ever since, honestly, I'm in a dilemma. It is not the question of the global coexistence that baffles me, although this too is a very interesting notion. I would like to have a take on that at some point. But I'm perplexed as to which East and which West could I apply this inference. Are we talking about the East with the downtrodden masses who have to struggle for the next meal, or the conscientious low to middle class people who just want a peaceful life with honor and dignity, and who are allowed none? People who see their loved ones being burnt and torn apart every day, and to whom the only face of the West is through client regimes or drone attacks? Or shall we discuss the East with the luxury cars and huge palaces and foreign bank accounts and the soulless faces, imperious eyes, completely blinded by their dazzling wealth and power? The kind of people who take for granted the only use of the masses to increase their wealth and luxury. To which West can we raise this question of global coexistence? The West of the most compassionate people that I have known, people with great moral civic sense, people who are caring enough to passionately respond to every call for human or even animal rights, but at the same time, people to whom the mass mutilations and murder of millions in the East remain just numbers. Are we talking about the West of warmongers sitting in the imperialist polyarchies who further their militarized and capitalist agendas around the world in popular terms? Or West of Wall Street's likes who have officially mortgaged people's lives, or those victims who have lined up from Spain to US to London to Rome and elsewhere to claim back theirs? And the list goes on. So I decided to address one group only, and that is you, ladies and gentlemen, the academicians, the scholars, the intellectuals. You are in unique position to access the facts and realities across the borders, and you have to reach the grassroots. So, if I could make only one point today, even at the cost of slight deflection from the topic, that would be to exhort the scholars all around the world to come forward and do their part. not to write self-serving papers full of jargon which nobody understands on the streets, not to hold the conferences of intellectuals, by intellectuals, for intellectuals. But if we are, such things are flattering, they comfort our egos, but if we are not communicating to the common people things that they know not, if we are not engaging with the masses and enlightening and animating them, then pardon me when I say that we are dysfunctional. And I very regretfully say that collectively across the world we are. Let me elaborate that a bit. And that will also bring home the reason for my apparently irrelevant diatribe about the academicians, the intellectual community. The very existence of this question on global coexistence, in my view, is the lucid reflection that the international scholastic community as a whole has miserably failed. Explain further. Let's be open that the goal here is not too grand or too ambitious. We are talking about the global coexistence. It's not interaction, not cooperation, mere existence, mere coexistence. Fail to conceive an issue of coexistence or even active interaction, cooperation between the plutocracies and imperialist polyarchies of the West and most of the brutal monarchies of the East. We know that things have been more than comfortable between the West and the dictatorial oligarchies of Asia and Africa. In fact, the ironic truth is that the terrorist regimes at both ends, that is, the main actors in the so-called war on terrorism and the well-known popular terrorist organizations around the world, their relation is actually symbiotic. They depend on each other to coexist, to continue their existence. But I digress. So, more importantly, the main point is, I see little reason to not believe that the often distressed but persevering, hardworking, benevolent, middle and low-class people across East and the West, which comprise more than 90% of these societies, that they are in any substantial conflict of ideologies and values. So, just to compare the Arab Spring with the Occupy movements across the different Western countries, and you'll see I happen to be, when it happened in USA, I happened to be there for a few days. I got a chance to go there and look up, talk to them and observe them closely. And if you do that, you see a golden unifying thread of harmony and cohesion running across these civilizations. And a thread without a streak of any ideological clash. So, if you think that there is none that I've failed to see right now, and I'm trying to be very short and precise, lest I'm thrown out of here. So we can talk about that definitely later in the discussions. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the different perspectives of the clash of civilizations have never been established or accepted on any real grounds but gross misinformation. For a huge population of the East, the only introduction to the West is either its oppressive client regimes or the carpet bombings and drone attacks, leaving hallmarks of burnt and mutilated dead bodies and some crippled, sobbing lives that forever envy the dead. In the West, half of the Arabs are depicted as terrorists in the media, and the rest are utterly unworthy morons. So, after all that massive indoctrination, we are audacious enough to raise the question of global coexistence, as if we are organically so different, so hostile, so intolerant, that our social ability natural ability to coexist is in doubt. The Western surprise on the Arab Spring's character and ideology, rather than its degree alone, is itself a glowing tribute to the effectiveness of the state's mass media propaganda and constant manufacturing machine. The last 1 century alone has seen numerous small and big movements across the Arab world, and in the rest of the countries, in Asia and Africa, and the Arab world, in Iran, and the rest of the Muslim countries as well. Now, that obviously is an inconvenient truth, given the fact that most of the Western states and Western powers supported most of these movements, and most of the tyrants of the time, and not the movements, and still continue to have, for example, their second closest ally as the country that has probably the worst absolute monarchy in the region, namely Saudi Arabia. Israel being the closest one with the highest human rights violations occur, I wonder. So those facts have to be carefully filtered out, and what is left is known as the Arab exceptionalism, the only theory feasible enough for the Western states and Western power centers. The Arab Spring is not a new thing. It just happens to be so large scale, due to the right circumstances, that it could not be masked anymore in this information age. I do not intend to underplay by the importance and influence of the Arab Spring, and I'll get to it in a minute. But it is imperative to mark the principal cause behind the perceived issues with the global coexistence in a very detached and very dispassionate manner. So Arab Spring is not a new phenomenon, it's only a reminder and a reinforcement, a very loud and clear one, no doubt, of the same ideals that animated the Arab societies several times in the past. It is a reflection, a clarion call, that a large set of values and ideals have always been shared between the grassroots across East and West. Although the Arab Spring, being the spectacular series of events that it has been, has effected a breakthrough with its sheer intensity, a lot more has to be done in order to capitalize on the great achievements by the Arab youngsters. It is arguable how many of its objectives these uprisings can actualize. A large number of analysts believe that most of the movements in different countries were either crushed or hijacked. Some more realistic viewpoints seek long-term evolutionary development emerging out of this breakthrough. So they talk about decades rather than months and years. But in this situation, one of the very few immediate wins that we can and must capitalize on is the new venues of not just coexistence, but of mutual engagement and understanding and appreciation and harmony between the East and the West, which emanated from this eloquent message of the Eastern ideals across the world, and which penetrated right through this machinery of calumnious propaganda and exclusion at both times. On the other hand, we must also recognize that the role of the Western powers during these revolts has not helped at all the disfigured Western image of the East. The responsibility lies with the people who have undertaken to be the eyes and brain of the society. All you need to do is let people see the truth, not the crippled truth, not the half-truth, the complete true picture of realities at both ends. Not only that will dissolve the gross misconceptions that theories of clash of civilizations often exploit, but will also neutralize the triumphalism that forms the second part of the problem. Coexistence in any context entails mutual emancipation that is exclusive of the intimidation and narcissism. The temptation of correction is hard to fight unless we all come to the agreement that we are as Catholic as any other nation in the world. There is no one Mr. Right or one size fits all solution. So, for example, the Western model of democracy, for example, might have been a good answer to the Western needs also, although that too has become very debatable in the recent years, and I won't even start with capitalism. But East has its own problems and its own answers, and so does the West. That should not impede anything. So let us not try to push our solutions down and values down and everybody's throat, either from East or from the West. The pluralist reality that was hidden for so many years will increasingly manifest itself, particularly as we move towards a world without a superpower, as I see it. But the question is, are we ready to embrace that as a beautiful cultural spectrum, or shall we keep chanting the ludicrous, rather self-fulfilling prophecies of the clash of civilizations? Socio-cultural evolution, friends, is a long journey, and we are all in it together. We continually grope for a better future. Some of us make mistakes, some make blunders, some are left behind at a turn to catch up later. But replicating the same experiences, repeating the same routes as taken by those who are further ahead, is not a condition to progress. Extending briefly what Dr. Scott Peck once said, we can share our similarities and celebrate our differences and move on to the next levels of the next planes, higher planes of life. So it does not hurt to believe in something or even to preach it to others. What hurts us when we drop every possibility of it not being the absolute virtue with the divine right to rule. So, and I believe that people at each side, they are capable of seeing that. Certainly if our scholars across the world, people with the light, are ready to play their objective and impartial role. Thank you very much. I'll finish with that. I also tried to bundle in the one question that I had earlier, what I had to say.